our number 10 spot we have Ed. When Tammy was a kid, her and her sister would often use Ouija boards, and it always seemed that they would end up communicating with the same spirit who was named Ed. Ed apparently wasn't super nice because he would continually threaten their younger brother during this time, and he was never with them during the times that they were using the board, so it was definitely weird. Eventually they got creeped out enough that they got rid of the board and just put Ed behind them. A few years later, when their little brother got older, he had used a Ouija board with his friend a couple of times, and he came home to tell his older sisters a story that had him freaked out. He explained that every time him and his friend used the board, there kept being a spirit named Ed who was threatening him. Apparently their mother ended up banning the use of Ouija boards in their house, which really is the right move. In our number 9 spot today we have The Book. Okay, so what if I told you that someone out there really thought it was a good idea to write a book that is for children, but it tells them how to summon demons? I mean, listen, for years there's been urban legends like Bloody Mary and Charlie Charlie, which of course tell us instructions on how to summon those respective demons, but urban legends are part of being a child. It's spooky stories to share amongst friends, but this book really takes things to an entirely new level. Many who are more well versed in the worlds of witchcraft and the paranormal have explained that this book, written by Aaron Layton, is basically a grimoire. It contains 72 different demons that can be conjured by those who read it for their own personal gain, which is basically the definition of black magic. The book not only includes these sort of cute drawings of creepy demons, but it also includes the symbols for each demon, which some have warned is also a very bad sign. In our number 9 spot today we have The Room. This story comes from an anonymous source, but we'll call them Alex. Alex and their fiance, who we'll call Sam, were given a Ouija board that their friend had apparently found on the side of the road, which I feel like is the worst place to find a new Ouija board. Alex and Sam decided to use it one night and began to ask questions. They asked who was with them and if they were an angel, demon, or spirit. It replied that their name was Mo and that they were a demon by your creation. Alex and Sam were obviously freaked out and just asked a few more simple questions, like, what is your favorite poster of ours on the wall? Mo replied with bloody mess. Alex and Sam had a kiss photo with Gene Simmons on it that had blood everywhere on it. Alex pointed to that poster and asked, this one? Mo said yes. Alex and Sam had a few skeleton heads that sat on their TV, so they asked Mo to move the skeleton heads so that they could have proof Mo was real. Mo said to close their eyes, so they did. A few seconds later, all of the skulls on the TV had moved to be facing them. Only Sam and Alex were in the room at the time, and they had been sitting right next to each other, which would have made it impossible for one of them to be pranking the other. In our number 7 spot today we have Niccolo Paganini. Niccolo was a professional violinist who was born in 1782. His parents began to send him to lessons when he was just 5 years old, and by age 15 he was already touring the world because he was so talented. What's interesting about Niccolo and his story, other than his obvious musical genius however, is the rumors surrounding his talent and subsequent recognition. According to some, people believe that his own mother summoned the devil in order for her son to be the extreme talent that he is. There are many modern diagnoses that could potentially explain some of what made Niccolo so talented, and I mean, we all know quite well that sometimes people are just born with extreme talent, but of course in the early 1800s people in their imagination certainly ran wild. The final reason why people believe he may have made a deal with the devil is because shortly before his death he was quite sick. The doctors had a feeling he was nearing death, so they sent in a priest to pray over him. When he first saw the priest, it is said that he freaked out and sent the priest away. Many people believe that him pushing the priest away was only a confirmation of the fact that he was working with the devil. In our number 6 spot today we have the Lady Ghost Demon. This story comes from the Reddit user 7 Spider, and they really just dive in. Basically, for several years, Spider saw what they thought was just a lady ghost every night at the door of the closet. It happened for so long that Spider just got used to it and even started saying goodnight to her. Spider says she didn't look bad or rotten, she was just a lady with pale skin and dark hair. Anyway, after a few years of this, Spider finally tells a friend at school about the lady. He of course didn't believe the story right away, but the next day at school he tells Spider that this lady tried to hurt him while he was sleeping. Now Spider didn't believe the friend and thought he was just playing a prank. Some more time goes by and Spider decides to tell another friend about the lady, and the same thing happens where the next time she comes and tells Spider that the lady had tried to hurt her while she was sleeping. The first friend and the second friend didn't know each other, so it's not like they could have been conspiring, which made Spider believe his first friend was telling the truth. Then, a while after that, Spider is on a video chat with a friend and they're talking about the paranormal when they both see something run across the screen. They chalk it up to being a glitch, and Spider starts telling this friend about the lady, and then Spider begins to get extremely dizzy, like they're about to pass out. After it goes away, Spider tells their friend that they're okay, and the friend replies that they were out of it for at least a full minute, and that he could feel that someone was there trying to hurt Spider. In the end, I'm just really glad that Spider and all of the friends ended up being okay, and I really hope they found a way to get rid of that demon lady. In our number 5 spot today, we have the meditation. This story comes from someone online who starts off by explaining that they accidentally summoned a demon once and it was a huge mistake. They say that it all started when they were meditating with some stones that a friend had given them. They say that the stones were polished and given to them in a medicine bag. When they went to meditate, they were holding 4 in each hand, just letting their mind wander, when they felt something or someone slam into their back. After this, they heard demonic laughter and a bunch of banging upstairs when there shouldn't have been anyone up there. They immediately blew out their candle and left the house. When they returned to the house later, they explained that this is when they started to see shadow crawlers all over the walls. The strange occurrences continued as they would hear the sound of children laughing in their home despite no children being there, and things would suddenly disappear only to be found later in places that had already been checked. They finished this story by saying that they ended up fleeing the house one night and burning it down, never to look back. I'm gonna be honest, not sure about the whole burning the house down thing. Seems maybe a little illegal, but I guess all is fair in the world of demonology. In our number 4 spot today, we have Zozo. This story comes from the Reddit user Archaic Alchemy, who we'll call A. When A was 22, they were staying with their sister, and one night they had a couple good friends over to hang out and play around with a Ouija board, which is always the start of a good demon story. A had read about people encountering an entity called Zozo, and A really just wanted some proof that things exist beyond our physical realm, so they really wanted to use the Ouija board. Everyone places their hand on the planchette and A calls out to Zozo. It took a few attempts before anything happened, but then the planchette began to move in figure 8s. No matter what was asked, it just kept moving in this pattern until it finally spelled out M-A-M-A. A kept asking who they were talking to, and eventually they spelled out Zozo, and then things really escalated. The planchette was taken to the letters to spell out kill you, and when A asked who, they spelled out one of the friends' names. They didn't take it seriously and kept asking more questions, and one friend made the mistake of insulting Zozo. The planchette begins frantically moving through the alphabet backwards over and over before it stops. Then the energy in the room completely drops, and A knows that this means that Zozo has manifested itself. Suddenly, A begins to laugh maniacally with no control over it. A could feel Zozo's presence inside, and could feel Zozo turning all of this hatred and anger towards the friend that had been named before. A's emotions suddenly completely switched, and they began crying uncontrollably before again suddenly snapping back to anger. A's head turns involuntarily to look at the friend with a menacing grin as A pushes the planchette towards this friend. The friends decide it's rightfully time to leave, and shortly after they left, A felt like they regained control again and Zozo's presence had disappeared. I'm very glad that nothing even crazier happened and that Zozo wasn't able to end up harming this friend in the end. In our number 3 spot today, we have Giuseppe Tartini. Okay, so this story is one that is kind of similar to Nicolo's, but even more strange. Giuseppe was an Italian violinist and composer who lived during the 1700s. He went on to compose a song called The Devil's Trill Sonata, and not only this, but he also claimed to wake up one night to find Satan sitting on the edge of his bed playing the violin. Seems as though the devil really likes violins, apparently. What's extremely curious is that after this alleged encounter, it is said that Giuseppe's violin skills hit heights never seen before. He was able to suddenly play extremely complicated trills that are impossible for most musicians. Apparently even today the sonata is too difficult for many musicians to play, which is why people believe that perhaps this story really was true. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Gray Skin Demon. This story comes from Pink Magic PinkMagic724 on Reddit, and it is about a night that they had a few years ago while still in college. Pink Magic's best friend of many years was in town, so they went out for a dinner to catch up and spend some time together. They of course ended up getting a bit caught up, as best friends do, and before they know it, it's around 2 AM and definitely time for them to head home. Pink Magic's friend was the one who drove, so they headed off to Pink Magic's house. They're at an intersection waiting for the light to turn green when Pink Magic turns their head and looks out the window into the car next to them. This is when she sees the person next to them is looking directly back at them, but this person has gray skin, completely black eyes with no white, and they are smiling but their teeth are long and sharp. Whoever or whatever this thing is will not break eye contact. Pink Magic tries to scream, but no sound will come out. I've had that nightmare before, and eventually the friend sees this creature too and immediately speeds out of there. To this day, neither of them like to talk about it, and neither of them are quite sure what exactly they witnessed. In our number 1 spot today, we have Johann Georg Faust. According to the stories passed down about this man, it is said that he was an alchemist and astrologer who lived in Germany during the 1500s. It is said that in his plight to become the smartest man in the world while also enjoying as many earthly pleasures as possible, he summoned the help of a demon named Mephistopheles. I thought that that was just one of the cats from Cats, but apparently not. Anyways, there are terrible stories about how cruel and truly evil this man was, and as a professor, it is said he looked down on everyone else because he thought he was smarter than them. Local priests apparently believed that he had actually made a deal with the devil, and that his pet dog was actually a demon who was able to shapeshift. What's most interesting about this is that during his life, he did publish several grimoires, and in 1540, while conducting some sort of alchemaic experiment, his laboratory exploded. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Theophilus of Adana. Okay, so to start off this list today, we are taking it a little bit back all the way to 538 AD. Theophilus of Adana was a cleric in the Roman Catholic Church. So basically, one day he was elected to become the new bishop, but he ended up denying the offer as it is said that he wanted a more priestly sort of position instead of one with all of that power and responsibility. It is said that he wanted the position of archdeacon, which would have seen him controlling where the donation money went. So apparently, in passing on this bishop position, he thought that if he gave this bishop position to his rival, then his rival should at least be grateful enough to give him the position he wanted. But of course, that did not happen. The new bishop gave away the seat that Theo wanted and instead gave him the position of being a humble cleric. This made Theo super angry, and this is when he thought that maybe the church isn't as holy as he once thought they were. This is when he decided to summon the help of Satan. He ended up signing a contract with Satan in his own blood. He denounced Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and it is said that, with the help of Satan, he was once again voted into the bishop position, and this time he accepted. At this point in time, it is said that he felt so guilty he confessed to this deal with the devil, and the priest who he confessed to decided that they should burn the blood-signed contract. For a second, Theo looked up, but then suddenly he collapsed and died. Many people believe that it was because he had broken his contract with Satan. In our number 9 spot today, we have Woken Up. This story comes from someone named Justin, and one night Justin and some friends decided to try their hand at contacting the spirit world through a Ouija board. They began to ask questions, but instead of the planchette moving to certain letters, it began to move to all 4 corners of the board, making a sort of X before it just started to go in circles. Justin and his friends decided to call it a night with the board, but not too long after this day, Justin decided to try again with a different friend. The planchette began to move in strange patterns again, but this time Justin said it felt like some sort of hex. Later that night, as he was sleeping, he all of a sudden out of nowhere felt some sort of forceful hand grab his arm, which of course jolted him awake. Once awake, he couldn't see anyone or anything around him, and everyone in his house was peacefully asleep. In our number 8 spot today, we have Aleister Crowley. This man is quite well known for being the leader of an occult group, and this really does stem back even into his childhood. It is said that quite early on, Aleister started calling himself the Beast and the Antichrist, and he is even quoted as saying that God and Satan fought over his soul. In one of his books, he wrote, quote, "I was in the death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul, those 3 long hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God? Many people believe that perhaps he made a deal with Satan, but it is possible that these are just rumblings based on Alistair's teachings and beliefs. In our number 7 spot today we have The Basement. This story comes from someone named Vince, and it has to do with the time he played with a Ouija board. He didn't really expect much to happen and was just sort of going along with it, but during the time using the board, the lights began to flicker and the air around Vince and his friends got quite cold. This is when they knew that something more serious was going on. The demon began to communicate with them through the board, and it told them its name, which Vince says seemed like a sort of Russian name. When they asked how the dark spirit got there, they explained that they had been killed. Vince explains that he and his friends took a break from the board, but they didn't remember to close the circle before they left, which, if you're not familiar with Ouija boards, is a huge mistake. Once they all returned back to the basement where they left the board, they could feel the heavy energy in the room, and they came to find that everything was in complete disarray. Books were thrown about, things were sprawled on the floor, but the only thing that hadn't been touched was the board, which still sat perfectly still in the center of the room, just how they had left it. Victor ends his story by saying, quote, "Upon looking at a mirror that we had nearby, the eye of the Ouija board was moving sporadically in its reflection." In our number 6 spot today we have The Text. Okay, so this story isn't like others on this list, and it's one of the strangest I've ever heard. So basically, this person who was, on a dating app receives a text message one day from one of the guys that they were talking to that says, quote, "I've been thinking about summoning Satan to impress you." Okay, personally I would run the other way, but turns out these are texts some people are just waiting around to receive. When they followed up the text, the person said again, quote, "No, I'm not kidding. Unless I told you when I was drunk, I legitimately sold my soul to him in January 2013. Turns out this guy really meant it. Of course, this person needed to know more, and as it turns out, they got the full story. So basically, this guy explained the entire procedure of selling your soul. He said that it's simple, you just have to write a letter, sign it in your blood, perform a sort of ritual, and then some sort of physical mark will show up on your body, like a scratch, and according to this guy, your wish has just come true. Apparently after this guy had done all of that, he said that he laughed in a voice that wasn't his own, and since then, all of his desires have been coming true. This story is weird, but apparently it really is that easy. Definitely wouldn't recommend trying it though, just in case, In our number 5 spot today we have The Entity. This story starts off hot when the storyteller explains that they have used a Ouija board, and since doing so, they clearly have opened their home up to some sort of evil entity who hasn't exactly been kind. They say, quote, "It started out with that feeling like you're being watched, and doors are closing, and you hear footsteps on the hardwood when you're home alone, and it progressed slowly into being kept awake by something shaking the bed or pulling off your covers, sometimes even whispering your name. The board would disappear for days on end, then show up in places you never would have put it. I became obsessed with it. Then it was a black mass in the corner of the room, or the silhouette of a man watching you from the doorway. After that, it escalated pretty quickly. I had my hair pulled, fingers pricked, scratched." They go on to explain that sometimes while they're trying to sleep, they find themselves unable to move and can feel the entity whispering in their ear in what they say is Latin. They explained that they have since had their house blessed and are hoping that this keeps the demon at bay. In our number 4 spot today we have Jack Parsons. Jack was a man who was born just a few years prior to the Wright brothers flying the first airplane, and being born at a time like that had him growing up dreaming of and reading sci-fi novels about rocket ships taking people to space. It is said that this love of rocket ships and these dreams of going to space are what led to him summoning the devil in order to make a deal. Jack wanted to sell his soul in exchange for a rocket ship. This deal didn't end up working, but Jack continued to study science as he grew older. Later in his life, he stumbled upon the teachings of Aleister Crowley that we talked about before, and this is when he tried his hand at summoning things again. This time, he tried to summon a goddess named Babylon that was said to possibly help men get to the moon one day. Technically, in some ways, it worked because Jack Parsons ended up helping create the jet fuel that is said to still be used today. Maybe it was the deal with the devil, maybe it was the goddess, or maybe it was just good old passion and drive that did it. I guess it all depends on what you believe. In our number 3 spot today we have The Mistake. This story starts off with the storyteller and their wife and this new home that they had moved into. They both noticed some weird things happening around the house, and this led to them getting a Ouija board in the hopes that maybe they could get some answers as to what may be happening here. What they didn't realize before using the board, which is pretty common, is that these boards open the door to communication for anyone. Anything lurking on the other end can answer the call, and sometimes it's not the spirit you're hoping for. While using the board, they ended up contacting some sort of entity that didn't give them very clear answers, and things were feeling kind of vague. Near the end of their Ouija experience, they had the planchette just suddenly fly off the board despite neither of them touching it. After this experience, however, things got so bad that the pair had to break their lease and move. They explained that there were radios and TVs turning on by themselves all the time, they would find taps running when no one had left them like that, they could hear disembodied voices around their home, objects were moving, and the storyteller's wife even said that she had found the storyteller possessed one night, but he has no memory of it. In our number 2 spot today we have The Artist. Back in 1677, an artist named Christoph Heismann was working on a castle in Austria. He was so talented at his job that he had been commissioned by the nobles to do this work. There were rumblings about how he may have sold his soul to the devil, but no one was sure of it until it is said that Christoph confessed. He said he had 9 years prior and that he regretted it very much now and actually wanted an exorcism. They demanded to know if he was a practicing witch, but in the end it was decided that he was not, and that instead the devil just had a very strong hold on him. The local priest began giving Christoph exorcisms, and during these sessions Christoph explained that he had these intense visions where he was coming face to face with the devil, who was in the form of a dragon. The dragon was holding the contract that held Christoph's soul, and this is when he was able to rip it out of the dragon's talons. When he woke up, it seemed as though he was cured. After this, he began painting pictures of the devil, and he even painted a story with multiple panels that told the story of how he sold his soul and how they helped him get it back. In our number 1 spot today we have This Is Not a Game. This story is said to have taken place over a decade ago, and it starts off when the storyteller's sister had some friends over and they were in the basement watching a scary movie when they decided to start playing around with the Ouija board. Things weren't going exactly as they anticipated, and they all started getting frustrated at the board and began to hurl some insults toward it, calling it fake and things like that. At this point they turned their attention back to the movie and away from the board, but it soon became clear that someone was in fact listening. All of a sudden the lights and all of the electricity goes out and it's just pitch black. The TV suddenly turns back on, but it's just blaring static. The TV shuts off again and turns back on, but it's just a black screen. Suddenly words appear on the screen that reads, "This is not a game anymore." They all ran out of the house as quickly as they could, and that was definitely the last time any of them touched a Ouija board. It isn't exactly clear who or what they summoned, but whatever it was, it certainly was not playing around. Starting off in our number 10 spot we have The Dreams. This is a story from somebody named Jake P, and they wrote, quote, "My buddy and I found a Ouija board at my girlfriend's house. We were really bored, so we went to this graveyard by my house to see if it would actually work. As suspected, nothing happened. We brought the board back to my house and didn't think anything of it." I feel like that's like the classic story. Just when the Ouija board hears you talking smack, that's when things always start to go crazy though. Jake continues on saying, quote, "The next day, strange things began happening. Out of nowhere, my friend started having sleep paralysis every time he spent the night at my house, despite never having it before. The first time he saw a tall woman with long black hair standing in the corner of the room facing the wall. The next time he was asleep on the couch and he saw the same woman standing at my open door looking directly into my room." I don't know what demon lady they summoned, but I hope they did everything they could to get rid of her. Sounds an awful lot like the bent neck lady, and we all know how well that went. In our number 9 spot today we have Joe. Joe isn't necessarily the first name that comes to my mind when making a list of spooky demons, but this story that was posted on Reddit might just make me think a little differently. They explained that a few months ago one of their friends brought over a Ouija board. There were around 5 of them at this sleepover, and they all began playing around with it and asking questions, and that is when they met Joe. After about an hour of questions and answers with Joe, one of the girls asks, "Joe, are you a bad spirit?" Joe answered, "N-O, okay." That's good. But then Joe spelled out H-I-M. The girls asked him who he was talking about, and that's when he spelled out the words "he's coming" and started to spell out Zozo, which, if you aren't familiar, is one of the worst Ouija board demons you could possibly encounter. That ended up being the end of the Ouija board experience for the girls that night because how terrifying, but they decided in the morning to try again. This time, they began speaking to someone who apparently claimed to be Joe's wife. They asked her if Joe was a bad spirit, to which she quickly replied, "Y-E-S." In our number 8 spot today, we have the dog. This story starts off with the storyteller, who we'll call Alicia, and her friends playing with a Ouija board in the backyard. She explains that they did end up contacting someone, and this is when one of the friends, who was also there, decides that it would be a good idea to insult the name of this entity. I don't know about you, but I certainly would never risk it. I'm not trying to be haunted for the rest of my life and my afterlife just because I thought I was smug. Anyway, when the friend throws this insult out, the fence behind them immediately starts to rattle. This was enough to convince them that it was time to pack up and head back inside. They all headed for the door, but Alicia's dog stopped at the bottom of the stairs, which was already unusual behavior. When they turned to look at the dog, they found him standing there just snarling, looking at something that he could see out in the darkness. I'm sure hoping that the person learned not to insult people who lay on the other side. In our number 7 spot today, we have Blanche. This story comes from the Reddit user Turtleshell Magic, and it involves their friends M and L. So one night, the three of them were at M's house and decided to crack open the good old Ouija board for a little spooky fun. They contacted some sort of spirit whose name was Blanche and who lived sometime in the 1800s, and everything was going well until M asked Blanche how they died, and she replied with the word killing. M asked how they had been killed, and Blanche said, "Not I." From there, everything started to get really heavy and the room just felt different. All of a sudden, the board was ripped from their hands and went flying across the room. They stopped playing immediately, but I don't think that they closed everything properly. After this incident, M's mom passed away just a week after from an illness that no one knew she had. Not long after this, Ella's mom was hospitalized, and then shortly after that, Turtleshell's mom had to have emergency surgery. Maybe this was all just some horrible coincidence, but Turtleshell says that since then they have experienced things that they think are directly related to what happened that night. Things like hearing voices, dark shadows, hearing footsteps. They find themselves wondering if they're still haunted despite it having been 9 years since that night. In our number 6 spot today, we have the devil. This is a story that is actually the one that caused this person to swear off Ouija boards for the rest of their life. They say the experience was so terrifying it made them completely lose interest. They explain that halfway through their session in this particular circumstance, they ended up contacting a new spirit who claimed to be the devil. I personally would like to hang up that call for sure, especially when this person explains that the spirit seemed to be annoyed that it was being disturbed. So sorry, no problem, I'll go. The storyteller explains that after receiving several messages from the spirit that said, "Please stop," and then "stop," which for the record I would have listened the first time, but apparently they just kept going because they say that suddenly the temperature dropped, just like you see in the movies. From here, the spirit gave them a message that read, "If you do not stop now, I will fill the room with the most evil spirits." They definitely took that one seriously and decided it was best to stop, and simply has never gone back. In our number 5 spot today, we have the thrifting find. One day, this Reddit user found a real old school wooden Ouija board at a thrift store. I probably would have run in the opposite direction, but they ended up purchasing it. Later that evening, they and a friend decided to try it out and asked a few questions but never got a response. They of course got bored and left the Ouija board out on the bed and headed out of the house to go and get some snacks. This was all fine until they came back to the house. When they got back, they realized that the planchette was now moving, but completely on its own. The word foul was being spelled out over and over again, and the two just stared at it in absolute awe. Eventually they grabbed the board, broke it in half, and covered it with salt before they got rid of it in a safe place. I definitely think that experience was probably the last time they ever used a Ouija board. In our number 4 spot today, we have persistence. This story is from someone with the username Amara Lachey, and they wrote, quote, "My cousin was heading to a party with a Ouija board in the trunk of her car for all of us to use. On the way to the party, she got in a car wreck. She was fine, but her car was totaled. So obviously, instead of going going to the party, she went back home. When she opened her closet to get ready for bed, the board was somehow back in the closet. She burned it after that. Honestly, that is the only truly good response to having something like that happen. I'm just glad she was okay, and hopefully that board never came back again. In our number 3 spot today, we have signs. This story starts out like many of the others on this list. A group of friends just casually trying their hand at contacting the paranormal. You know, that stuff that most of us do on weekends. The friends felt as though they had contacted someone, but they wanted to be sure, so they said, "If you're here, give us a sign." They all stood there and nothing happened, which made them doubt the power and ability of the Ouija board. Just as they were beginning to laugh at the board, they received a sign that the entity was with them. This came in the form of lights flickering on and off for minutes at a time. It didn't stop here though. They also could hear footsteps stomping above them despite being the only ones home. Safe to say they were sufficiently spooked and apologized for ever doubting whatever entity they came into contact with. In our number 2 spot today, we have the following. This story starts out when this person's mother began to get interested in things like card reading and the occult, and she began trying to speak to spirits. One day she was using a Ouija board, and when the storyteller touched the planchette, it is said that it flew right out of his hand and smashed against the wall. This happened when he was a teenager, but since then, nothing has been the same. They explained that from then on, in the night, they could feel something looking at them from the darkest corner of their room, like some sort of shadowy figure. You can't really see because it's dark and it's nighttime, but you know it's there. Throughout their life, even after moving to different homes, they have seen things in the places they live that seem to be following them anywhere they go. In our number 1 spot today, we have I See You. This story comes from a Reddit user called No Springs. One day they were at a friend's house having fun and goofing around, and they decided to bring out a Ouija board. They weren't getting very many results and weren't really taking it seriously, but then they got a message from the board saying, "I can see you through the window." And then another after that said, "I can see you through his eyes." There was a small window in the basement room they were in, and through that window they could see the backyard, the driveway, and the woods that lay behind it. They continued to ask the spirit questions and ended up getting an answer that said, "I'm under the car." Somehow they were able to muster up the nerve to go and check under the car with flashlights. When they looked, they found a huge black stray cat hissing. This obviously terrified them, and they all ran back into the house as quickly as possible. At the exact moment they get back inside the house, all of the power shuts off, the lights go out, and it's completely dark. After that, it's safe to say that they stayed up all night, unable to sleep, and they definitely never played with a Ouija board again. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Mo. This story comes from an anonymous source, but we'll call them Taylor. Taylor and their fiance, who we'll call Sam, were given a Ouija board that their friend had apparently found on the side of the road, which I feel like is the worst place to find a new Ouija board. Taylor and Sam decided to use it one night and began to ask questions. They asked who was with them and if they were an angel, demon, or spirit. It replied that their name was Mo and that they were a demon by your creation. Taylor and Sam were obviously freaked out and just asked a few more simple questions like, "What is your favorite poster of ours on the wall?" Mo replied with "Bloody Mess." Taylor and Sam had a kiss photo with Gene Simmons on it that had blood everywhere. Taylor pointed to that poster and asked, "This one?" Mo said yes. Taylor and Sam had a few skeleton heads that sat on their TV, so they asked Mo to move the skeleton heads so that they could have proof that Mo was real. Mo said to close their eyes, so they did. A few seconds later, all of the skulls on the TV had moved to be facing them. Only Sam and Taylor were in the room at the time, and they had been sitting right next to each other, which would have made it impossible for them to be playing a prank on one another. In our number 9 spot today, we have Foul. One day when this Reddit user was around 16 years old, they found a real old school wooden Ouija board at a thrift store. I probably would have run in the opposite direction, but they ended up purchasing it. Later that evening, they and a friend decided to try it out and asked a few questions, but never got a response. They of course got bored and left the board out on the bed and headed out of the house to go and get some snacks, which was a big old mistake. Never leave a Ouija board without saying goodbye. When they got back, they realized that the planchette was now moving, but completely on its own. The word foul was being spelled out over and over again, and the two just stared at it in absolute awe. Eventually they grabbed the board, broke it, and covered it with salt before they got rid of it in a safe place. I definitely think that this experience was probably the last time they ever used a Ouija board, and I hope the salt was enough to keep the demon at bay. In our number 8 spot today, we have X. Listen, a demon is never a good thing, but a demon named X actually sounds kinda cool. I'm gonna go ahead and guess that the people who contacted him through a Ouija board might disagree with me, however. This Ouija board story starts a couple months after the storyteller's mom had passed away. She was at a friend's house one night and passed out after a few too many drinks and later awoke to find her friends playing with a Ouija board. The friends were in tears and were claiming that her mother was trying to contact them through the board. The storyteller hadn't ever used a Ouija board before and wasn't really sure if she believed in it, but she agreed to at least check out what they were saying, if for anything, to prove them wrong. As she moved over to the board, the presence claimed again to be her mom and spelled out XOXOXO, which was what her mother always ended text messages with. Okay, this sounds like a really nice Ouija board experience so far, right? Suddenly, they all felt a different energy throughout the whole room. This energy was heavy, and whatever this energy was, it took over the board. They asked its name, and the entity said X. They asked when it was born, and it moved the planchette to 0. After this, they saw a beam of light shoot from the wall and into the storyteller's eye. No one knew what was happening, so they all finished the session, closed the board up, and vowed to never touch it again. In our number 7 spot today, we have Damien. One day, a woman named Abby had been playing around with a Ouija board for a while and ended up contacting an otherworldly presence who said their name was Damien. Once she was finished asking her questions, she packed up the board and put it away. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she noticed that her computer screen changed from black to blue, which meant that it had been turned on somehow when she hadn't touched it. She turned the computer off again, and it once again turned itself on. This is already super strange and creepy, but she chalked it up to some glitch and just unplugged the computer. The computer, of course, somehow begins to start up again, even though it was unplugged. Abby ended up burying the Ouija board in her backyard, and hopefully that works, but I'm feeling a little worried that Abby didn't close her session and say goodbye properly, and maybe Damien is still lurking around there somewhere. In our number 6 spot today, we have Shush. Two friends decided that one night they would try their hand at a Ouija board. They weren't exactly familiar with the whole process, but they decided to give it a whirl regardless. They tried for a little bit to ask some questions, but weren't really getting many answers, so they decided to return to the top and try asking just a few more. They asked if anyone was there that would like to answer some questions for them, and as it turns out, whoever was listening at that point had had enough. The planchette immediately moved to no. The friends thought this was finally their chance to talk with someone from the other side, so they pushed further and decided to ask more questions despite the answer they had just received. The presence, of course, didn't like this and just simply wanted to be left alone. This is when the presence decided to take hold of the planchette and spell out SHUSH. Yup. Shush. After this, the friends said that the room felt considerably colder, and they decided that they better not stick around to find out what happens if they chose not to listen to what this presence just asked of them. I gotta say, that was probably for the best. In our number 5 spot today, we have Joe. Joe isn't necessarily the first name that comes to mind when making a list of spooky demons, but this story that was posted on Reddit might just make me think differently. They explained that a few months ago, one of their friends brought over a Ouija board. There were around 5 of them at this sleepover, and they all began playing around with it and asking questions, and that is when they met Joe. After about an hour of questions and answers with Joe, one of the girls asked, "Joe, are you a bad spirit?" Joe answered, "N-O." Okay, that's good. But then Joe spelled out H-I-M. The girls asked him who he was talking about, and that's when he spelled out the words, "He's coming." That ended up being the end of the Ouija board experience for the girls that night because how terrifying. But they decided in the morning to try again. This time they began speaking to someone who apparently claimed to be Joe's wife. They asked her if Joe was a bad spirit, to which she quickly replied, Y-E-S. In our number 4 spot today, we have Ed. A girl named Tammy and her sister used to mess around with Ouija boards when they were bored as teenagers, which sounds like the perfect plot of a B-roll horror film. Every time the pair used the board, they always came into contact with the same spirit who was named Ed. Ed wasn't horrible to the girls, but he would often threaten the girls' little brother, despite the fact that he was not playing with a board with them. It scared the girls so much that they eventually threw the board out. They never mentioned it to their brother because he was only 5 or 6 at the time, and it just wasn't worth freaking him out when they thought that they had taken care of it. Flash forward quite a few years later, and one day the little brother comes home with a friend. His friend brought a Ouija board, and the two started playing around with it. After they finished, the brother explained to his sisters that he was super freaked out. They asked why, and he explained that he had contacted some demon named Ed, and Ed kept threatening him. Their mom ended up banning Ouija boards in the house after that day. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Unnamed Demon. This Ouija board story comes from someone cousin named Paige, and unfortunately they weren't able to get this demon's name before they had to stop their Ouija board experience. When Paige was a kid, she moved into a new house that was way bigger but also way older than the one that they had lived in before, with her teenage sister and her mom. On the first night in the new house, the lady sat on the floor and ate pizza, as you do when you move into a new house, and Paige's sister convinced their mom to let them play with a Ouija board. They started trying to make some sort of contact when a heavy box of books went flying across the living room out of nowhere. They were also in the living room, which had a fireplace, and earlier in the evening they had lit a fire. Right after the box flew across the room, the fire completely went out. Paige's mom was so freaked out that they all went and slept at their grandmother's house that night, which was probably the best idea that they've had all week. In our number 2 spot today we have Zozo. Would this be a list of Ouija board demons without Zozo? I think not. Zozo seems to have not been around for a very long time, but he is powerful, and in fact, as we talk about him, he only gains strength. Zozo is a demon who, if summoned during a Ouija board experience, even if you close everything properly and say goodbye as you should, you'll still be able to feel his presence lingering around for quite some time afterward. Many people have recounted their stories with Zozo, and while he is a demon, he acts like a poltergeist and has attempted to harm people, or at the very least has been known to throw furniture and other possessions around. These are only a few of the reasons why, if you find that you've summoned Zozo, it's imperative you close the Ouija board properly, and then also probably burn it after too, just to be safe. In our number 1 spot today we have Blanche. This story comes from the Reddit user Turtleshell Magic, and it involves their friends M and L. So one night the 3 of them were at M's house and decided to crack open the good old Ouija board for a little spooky fun. They contacted some sort of spirit whose name was Blanche and who lived sometime in the 1800s, and everything was going well until M asked Blanche how they died, and she replied with the word killing. M asked how they had been killed, and Blanche said, "Not I." From there, everything started to get really heavy and the room felt really different. All of a sudden, the board was ripped from their hands and went flying across the room. They stopped playing immediately, but I don't think they closed everything properly. After this incident, M's mom passed away just a week after from an illness that no one knew she had. Not long after this, L's mom was hospitalized, and then shortly after that, Turtleshell's mom had to have emergency surgery. Maybe this was just all some horrible coincidence, but Turtleshell says that since then, they have experienced things that they think are directly related to what happened that night. Things like hearing voices, dark shadows, hearing footsteps. They find themselves wondering if they're still haunted despite it having been 9 years since that night.
Starting us off with number 10 is Ronald Doe. Obviously not his real name, but many of you might recognize his story because it was the basis of the Exorcist book and movie. Now, Ronald grew up in the 40s as an only child and was very close to his aunt, who was a spiritualist and was actually the person who taught him how to use a Ouija board. So you have that crazy cool aunt, and now we have the impending doom demon aunt. Great, how times are evolving. Sometime later, when he was 14 years old, his aunt died, and Ronald was devastated, but he came up with the idea of contacting her via Ouija board. Contact his aunt he did not, but contact another screwed up demon he definitely did. Soon after, weird things started happening. Water dripping out of the walls, scratching sounds from all over the house, his mattress seemingly flipping over by itself, and normal things like potted plants levitating when he was near them. The family called their priest, and the priest saw it with his own eyes. Ronald underwent numerous exorcisms. One incident took place at a hospital. He got his hand free from the restraint, pulled the bed spring from under the mattress, and used it to slice the priest's arm. Other priests saw him speaking in weird tongues, his bed shaking, and Ronald unable to bear any sacred objects whatsoever. During his last exorcism, 3 priests were present, and they all say the words hell and evil, and other marks appeared on his body, and he even broke one of the priest's noses. But after the fact, he ended up pretty normal, you know, after all that. Coming at number 9 is Elizabeth Knapp. Let's go way back to the 1670s. 16-year-old Elizabeth was a servant in the house of Reverend Samuel Willis. covered. Living in an extremely strict Christian Puritan society, Elizabeth confessed a lot later in her life to having met and made a deal with the devil for 3 years as a sort of rebellion, and how badly that deal ended up. Word of advice, guys, never make a deal with the devil, it's just not a good idea. Knapp started showing signs of possession, like having pains throughout her body and feeling like she was being strangled even though no one was touching her. She used to laugh herself into hysterics. She also started to hallucinate, and she would talk in a deep voice and make animal noises. At one point she saw a man floating around her bed and 2 people walking around her when no one was there. Her fits became more violent whenever the Reverend was present. She also used to convulse on the ground and tried throwing herself into a fire. During one particularly bad bout, 4 people actually had to hold her down to the ground. She claimed the devil wanted her to kill herself and the family she worked for, but she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Her worst period was when she had a fit for 2 straight days and went into a catatonic state afterwards. She claimed the devil had taken over her and that she had no control over her speech or what she was saying. The best part is the Reverend actually kept a journal writing down everything he was witnessing, which is rich because I would just straight up have fired her. Can't have the devil around me and my kids, I'm sorry. At number 8 now we have Zelda. No, this one has nothing to do with the game, don't get excited. The story is from a Reddit user called Pipe Bomb Dreams who used a Ouija board to summon and speak to a demon or spirit. They kept getting in contact with a thing named Zelda, who never said much other than spelling her name over and over again. But after summoning her, bizarre things started happening around their house. Their radio would randomly switch to static, they'd hear knocking on the walls, footsteps on the stairs, and they even found a contact on their phone named Z, but it had their own phone number saved as the contact. They clicked on the contact to find a pending drafted message that simply had the letter A, and the autocorrect option suggested for A was Zelda. Wow, demons are getting advanced, they can also operate phones now. It wasn't a bad demon per se, but it never let the person summon anyone else ever. The user stopped using the board and the occurrences eventually stopped as well. That's probably the most docile demon or spirit if I ever saw one, and probably the most docile one on this list. Filling in our number 7 slot is Clara Germana Selle. Selle was a baptized orphan of South African descent, and way back in 1906 she was a student at St. Michael's Mission. At the young age of 16 she reportedly made a pact with Satan, because at 16 you're either studying for exams or making pacts with Satan, evidently. And I don't think any demon can be scarier than Satan himself. After this, Clara started gaining weird powers, so to speak. She was able to speak languages she had no prior knowledge of, like French, German, and Polish, and she also became clairvoyant, exposing secrets and sins of people she'd had absolutely zero contact with. She also became endowed with superhuman strength and used to throw nuns around the convent and beat them up. Being in the presence of blessed objects was torturous for her, and she was just unable to bear it. Her screeches were described by the nuns, and I quote, "No animal had ever made such sounds. It sounded like a veritable herd of wild beasts orchestrated by Satan had formed a hellish choir." That is a direct quote, my friends. Other people say she could also levitate horizontally and vertically. A priest exorcised her for 2 days before she hit his Bible out of his hand and tried to choke him with his own scarf. Oh, Clara, what did you do? Now at number 6 is Ithaca College. This story was shared by Reddit user Hypertrophic Mass Eater, and he recalls a story his friend told him. During the friend's college years, at about 18 or 19 years old, him and 3 other friends were in a part of campus that had a lot of old Gothic looking architecture. Already not starting off too great, let me just preface that right there. They entered one building and found one wall to be covered with a 40 feet long corkboard, and it happened to be a lot darker than the rest of the building. He stared at the board and felt colder than he ever had in his entire life, and then he suddenly became unable to breathe. Thinking he was about to die, he somehow mustered up some strength from deep within him and managed to snap out of it, and he hit his friend, who seemed to be in the same trance-like state he was in. But his friend was ice cold. When they finally ran off to find their other friends said that the boys had been staring at the wall for 20 straight minutes, not saying a word, not the 1 minute that the boys thought had passed. What ties this all together is the fact that there's a cliff nearby the college where a lot of students have committed suicide, not to mention the countless summoning stories originating from the college. The corkboard was actually filled to the brim with articles and flyers of student obituaries and missing students. It's unclear whether it's the pressure of school that drove people to kill themselves themselves or a demonic presence on campus. The latter sounds likely in the case of the two boys who probably experienced 20 minutes of possession. Could they have possibly ended up at the cliff if it lasted longer? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Coming at number 5 is the Charlie Challenge. Now, unless you've been living under a rock or have just been born, then you've probably heard of the Charlie Challenge that was popularized on social media way back in 2015. I say way back, but that was only 4 years ago. It's a remake of the Spanish game Juego de la Capicera. You put two pencils on top of each other to make a cross, and in the 4 quarters it makes on the page you write no, yes, no, yes. And then you ask it questions sort of like a Ouija board minus the spirits. However, kids started playing with it and addressing a spirit or demon named Charlie, and that's when things got a bit messed up. By May of that year, 4 high school students in Colombia had been hospitalized because they started babbling and screaming after playing the game. In the same month, various other schools in different countries across the Caribbean reported symptoms like fainting, trance states, and confusion after students had played the game. It got so bad to the point in June, several students were apparently possessed by the devil at the Juan Pablo Duarte Primary School in the Dominican Republic. Wow, who knew social media was that toxic? Actually, everyone. At number 4 is Billy and Claire. This is another story from Reddit shared by the user Strange Throwaway 1023. Now, this user summoned a demon, or at least prayed to one, in exchange for revenge. The user wanted to hurt someone who they aptly named Billy. Every night for a few weeks, they would pray and try to summon a demon, hoping one would hear them and then grant a favor. The favor was for Billy to fall into a hole and break his leg. Bit morbid. Well, the user claimed that it offered the demon a favor of any kind that was within their capability that they could cash in at any time. About a month or so later, Billy fell into a hole and broke his leg. Now, just to preface this, the names the user offered obviously aren't the people's real names, and the punishments are also not the exact punishments the user asked for, but this sort of gives you an idea of what the user did and went through. 3 years later, the user wanted a different sort of revenge for someone called Claire, and a month later, that exact thing happened. The user claims the demon is yet to cash in either of the favors, but is sort of hoping God will help them get out of the situation. I mean, I have no sympathy for you, Strange Throwaway 1023. You made your bed, now lie in it. Filling our number 3 slot is Anna Eklund, or we can call her by her real name, Emma Schmidt. Now, just to preface this one, this case is cited as the longest, most extensive case of demonic possession in history. So, let's have it. Born in 1882, Emma was a normal child, but during her early teens, she started exhibiting signs of possession. It was said that it was because of her aunt Mina, who was a witch. Mina was said to have placed summoning spells on herbs she'd put in Eklund's food. Emma started being averse to holy objects and could no longer even enter a church. She underwent her first exorcism in 1912. It was quite painless, and her next one wasn't until 1928. This exorcism started on the 17th of August and ended all the way in December. She hissed, she threw fits when she got food that was sprinkled with holy water, she started levitating, hanging from the frame of the doorway, and even howling. The exorcism took a major toll on her body since she stopped eating food and started vomiting what appeared to be tobacco leaves and other foreign herbs. She started speaking in multiple languages and her head even swelled up. They concluded she was possessed by a bunch of entities. For one, Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' disciples, her aunt Mina, who appeared when Emma spoke in a high voice, and finally her father Jacob, who cursed her with Mina because she refused his sexual advances when she was small. This hurts my heart. This girl has been through so much. After her final exorcism, where she started screaming Beelzebub, Judas, Jacob, Mina, and hell, she was reportedly fine and only went through minor possessions after that. And her aunt really screwed her up. Now at number 2 is Estefania Lazaro, and this one is 100% true, and it inspired the Netflix movie Veronica. While she was in school, her parents said she started developing an interest in the occult, and after one of her friends' boyfriends died in a car crash, she staged a seance with her friends at school to try and contact him. The ritual was stopped halfway by a teacher, but everyone reported seeing smoke go up through Estefania's nose and mouth. During the next 6 months, she started having hallucinations and seizures and would go into a rage and tell her parents she saw evil shadows walking past her room, or she would literally bark at her brothers. Doctors found nothing wrong with her, but a few months later they found her dead in her bedroom with no explanation whatsoever. Mind blown. Her parents suspected it had something to do with the Ouija board incident, and weird things started happening around the house after she died. I feel like every story on this list is like, and then weird things started happening in the house. Like they would hear whispers, appliances would switch on and off, and doors would just slam out of nowhere. I haven't seen the movie, but now I oddly want to. And finally, at number 1 is the Ammons family. Not to be confused with the Addams family, but I could see how you'd get that. Now back in 2011, Latoya Ammons moved into a new house with her mother Rosa Campbell and her 3 children. A few days later, after they moved in, a crazy amount of flies started swarming their porch and would not leave or die. Now the events that took place after this have led people to believe her children, aged 12, 9 and 7, were up late one night playing around online and may have summoned a demon, not believing anything would even happen. Kids, rookie mistake. Campbell started hearing doors creaking and opening and footsteps in their basement when no one was down there. She even saw a man pacing in her living room and found a literal boot print. If that's not hard evidence, I don't know what is. Her daughter's friend claimed her daughter was levitating above the bed at a sleepover, yet she had no recollection of the incident ever taking place. Her middle son was thrown across the room, and her youngest son's eyes rolled to the back of his head as he started saying the words, "I will kill you and it's time to die." A few months later, the Department of Child Services visited the house and they saw her youngest son walk up the wall backwards. That's personnel saying this, not even the family themselves. That's how you know it's real and not just lies. People claim it was the demon Beelzebub that was summoned, who's otherwise known as the Lord of the Flies. They hired a priest to perform not 1, not 2, but 3 exorcisms, and the family was demon-free after that.
Number 10. Maria. Ouija boards are wooden boards with planchettes that people use to try to communicate with the dead or even try to summon demons. It appears that this actually happened in 2006 at an all-girls Catholic school near Mexico City. Nearly 15% of the school started to suffer from mysterious symptoms, everything from headaches to difficulty walking, that would come and go with no warning. It was determined that the cause of this was a student named Maria, who had used a Ouija board to summon a demon. After finding out, she was expelled from the school. There are many reasons that certain people might try to call upon a demon, whether it be to take care of an enemy or try to become famous. So what was Maria asking for? Gotta be a good reason, right? Well, it turns out she had asked the demon to help her school win a basketball game. Definitely a good reason. Number 9. The Ammons family. Latoya Ammons lived with her 3 children in a small home in Indiana. While they only lived there for a year, she said that their entire life was turned upside down. The things that occurred in the home were written down in a document of interviews and police reports that was almost 1,000 pages long. So just what happened? Shortly after they moved into the home in 2011, they were swarmed by flies, even in the cold winter months, and no matter what the family did, they just kept coming. One of her children apparently levitated over top of their bed, another climbed backwards up the wall, and all of them spoke in deep demonic voices. These events were witnessed and believed by both child support workers, hospital nurses, and police officers. The children were removed and received exorcisms from a reverend. After everything had been done, Latoya and her family moved away, believing to this day that her home and her children had been possessed by demons. Ghost Adventures host Zach Bagans later bought the home in 2014, but had it demolished 2 years later, stating, "There was something there that was very dark, yet highly intelligent and powerful. Personally, I think this is just a great free advertisement for birth control." Number 8. Zozo. While a seemingly cute name that a child might name their dog, Zozo is apparently a demon who often appears to communicate through Ouija boards, looking to take advantage of those who choose to play the dangerous game. This group of friends, however, had a different type of interaction when they came together to use the board. The planchette told them that they were speaking to someone named Sue, but upon asking its true name, it started spelling out Zozo over and over again. It didn't stop until one member of the group asked it to. When asked why it had listened to him, Zozo told him that he was special. The group member then became able to guess what the demon was going to answer, and was even correct in calling it out when they blindfolded him, saying that Zozo was speaking to him in his head. Eventually, they ended the game when Zozo started to spell out the group member's name over and over again, the demon only leaving when he specifically asked him to. But apparently the experience wasn't all scary, as they reported that the demon had, quote, cracked jokes and said some funny. In my opinion, a demon who cracks jokes is still a demon, and I wouldn't really like to mess with it. Number 7. Roland Doe. In St. Louis, Missouri sits a home that was once the residence of a boy named Roland Doe, also known as Ronald Hunkler or Robbie Mannheim. When he was 13 years old, he became distraught over the loss of his beloved Aunt Harriet. She had apparently taught him many things, including how to use a Ouija board, because nothing bad has ever happened from using a Ouija board. He quickly started to experience strange things like scratching sounds, leaking walls, and his mattress moving. Multiple exorcisms were performed on him but seemed to fail, scratches appearing on his body including an X which they thought represented the number 10, saying that he had 10 demons inside him. As time went on, he would seem to be normal during the day, but at night would enter trance-like states, screaming and reacting violently to sacred objects. Ronald finally appeared to be cured after a final exorcism where he said he saw a vision of Saint Michael defeating Satan on a battlefield. Number 6. George Lukens. In the 1770s, a tailor named George Lukens started acting strangely. He was speaking in strange voices, making inhuman noises, and would go into fits of rage out of nowhere. He stayed in a hospital for 18 months where doctors deemed him incurable, not really sure what was wrong with him. People started to gossip that he was bewitched, and George himself said that he was possessed by no less than 7 different demons. Finally, in Bristol's Temple Church, 7 priests oversaw his exorcism. He apparently stated that he was the devil himself, becoming more violent and singing hymns backwards. Eventually, the priests finished their ritual and demanded that the demons return back to hell, and apparently, it worked. Lukens called out "Blessed Jesus," started praising God, and thanking those that had helped him. George Lukens went on with his life, after the event always being described as calm and happy. It's not often that you get a happy ending to these types of stories. Number 5. Charlie Charlie. If you were in school around the same time that I was, it's likely you've heard the story of Charlie Charlie, or even gathered around a desk with your friends to try and play it yourself. The game works like this. You split a paper into 4 sections, 2 labeled with yes and 2 labeled with no. You then stack 2 pencils on top of each other and ask, "Charlie, Charlie, are you there?" The pencil is then supposed to move on its own to point to a yes or no answer. You can then go on to ask Charlie whatever burning questions are on your mind and it will give you an answer. The person moving the pencils is supposedly a demon who was a child named, you guessed it, Charlie. While it may seem like a simple game, there are plenty of videos and stories of teens playing the game and supposedly actually summoning Charlie, the pencils moving and seeming to bring with them an aura of unease. This is an easy enough game to try out for yourself if you want to, but I'll leave that up to you guys. Number 4. Estefania Lazaro. This girl was born in South Madrid in the 1970s, and according to her parents, Estefania started playing around with the occult from a young age. Eventually, she ended up performing a seance at school in an attempt to contact one of her friend's deceased boyfriends. The ritual was interrupted by a teacher, but her friends said that they saw strange smoke going up into her mouth and nose. Since that day, she started suffering from hallucinations and seizures, but doctors weren't able to find anything medically wrong with her. She was then found deceased in her bedroom in 1991, but there seemed to be no explanation for how she had actually died. Her parents blamed it on her connection to the occult and her usage of a Ouija board, and strange things started happening in the house afterwards. This ranged from banging noises to objects appearing to jump from shelves. It seems that she hadn't managed to contact her friend's dead lover, but instead something far more sinister. Number 3. Revenge. Summoning demons isn't just a thing of the past, and many true believers still attempt to do it today. One user took to the internet to tell his story of attempting to summon the demon Malfes, who is supposedly second in command under Satan, having 40 legions of demons working under him. He wanted to get revenge on someone from school, and so he started a ritual. He drew a symbol on the ground in blood and swallowed salt to try and prevent getting possessed. He lit candles and supposedly had a real skull, all of which he laid out before reciting a prayer that is meant for Satan, but changing the name to Malfes. He said he then woke up face down on the floor and covered in blood, 5 hours apparently having passed since he first performed the ritual. He said he was terrified and could feel the presence of the demon in his room. I think he shouldn't have been so surprised. If you try and summon a demon, don't be too shocked if one shows up. Number 2. Gottlieben Dittus. In the 1800s, a woman by the name of Gottlieb Dittes lived in a small village in Germany. She was very religious growing up, and when her parents died at a young age, she lived with her siblings, continuing to attend services. However, strange things started to happen to her. She said that her house was haunted and she would often go into trance-like states. She said she was being visited in the night by the ghost of a woman holding a baby in her arms. She thought that evil spirits had been after her since she was a baby and her mother had been keeping them away. She also said her aunt was a witch, who may have been responsible for the evil spirits and demons. Eventually, it was determined that she had been possessed, and she underwent an exorcism that lasted 2 whole years. The Reverend reported her throwing up glass, nails, and blood, and she apparently became very physically violent. The demons were eventually finally removed by the Reverend, and he became like a celebrity for managing to complete the rituals. Number 1. Under the bed. 6 years ago, one person told the story of how they think they may have accidentally summoned a demon in their youth. From a young age, they had been obsessed with dark and creepy things and had decided to make themselves a creepy doll, because hey, who wouldn't? But when sewing it closed, they pricked their finger, trapping some of their blood inside the doll. From then on, they always felt like they were being watched, and even said they would hear raspy breathing at night. They felt they knew there was a spirit with them and asked its name, and it replied in the same raspy voice saying, "Adam." They also recalled a time when they had sensed a presence in their room and looked under their bed to see a face, looking at them obscured in the dark. Even when they moved houses, they left the doll behind, but it suddenly appeared in a drawer in their new home. More things would continue to happen for years, like objects disappearing or sounds from empty rooms. Eventually, they had a friend come over to visit who became panicked when apparently hearing the raspy voice repeating its name. When they left, all the strange occurrences stopped happening, and they believed that the demon had attached itself to their friend and left. I don't know about you guys, but if one of my friends stuck a demon to me, I don't think I'd ever talk to them again.